We're on Daf Dalid, Omid Aleph, but first let's just review the main point from Gimel Omid Beis. The Gemara here on Daf Gimel Omid Beis presents a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar. And the issue is how to create lishma in a get. And there are two possibilities. The Eidim, when they sign the get, they have to sign it lishma. And that's called Edi Chasima Karsi, which means, and this is Shita Rabbi Meir, that the get is a self-contained unit with the two signatures of the Eidim. And the fact that there are two Eidim signed on the get, that itself establishes that the get is kosher and it was written lishma. And that's the Shita Rabbi Meir. Then we have a dissenting view of Rabbi Eliezer, and he's of the opinion that the writing of the get is lishma. However, we don't need any signature on the get at all. And in order to prove that this get is a valid get, we need what's called Edi Masira. Not two Eidim signed on the get. We don't have two Eidim signed on the get, according to Rabbi Elazar, but rather two Eidim who saw the Baal, they witnessed the Baal deliver the get to his wife. The Gemara also suggests that, according to Rabbi Elazar, although midoraisa you don't need the Eidim to sign on the get, but the Rabbanan made a takana, and they required that the Eidim sign on the get. And the reason for that is because if she receives the get, how is she going to prove that she's divorced in order to allow her to marry some other man when she can't get hold of the Eidim Masira? They're out in Medina Sayyam, or they died already. So therefore, the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer would require two witnesses signed on the get, and they have to sign on the get lishma on a D'Rabbanan level. And therefore, if the Eidim have to sign lishma, then in a case of a get in the hands of a shliach, he's going to have to testify b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtav. So let's start Daf Daled by looking at the last three lines on Daf Gimel Amid Beis, starting with the word V'ela. 3.5 lines up from the bottom. V'ela, if you've established that the Mishnah does not reflect the Shita Rabbi Elazar, because the Tanava Mishnah requires that the Shliach testify b'fanei nechtam, which means I saw the Eidim sign lishma. And according to Rabbi Elazar, there are no Eidim signed on the get, certainly not on a Doraisa level. There's no requirement of such. So therefore, by process of elimination, our Mishnah would have to reflect the Shita Rabbi Meir. V'chilo boy Rabbi Meir, siva lishma midoraisa. And even though Rabbi Meir holds that the entire kashrus of the get depends upon the signatures, not on the writing of the get, but even Rabbi Meir would agree that halacha l'maisa, the get has to be written lishma midrabanan boy. Rabbi Meir agrees that the ksiva has to be lishma midrabanan. So the Tanav Mishnah that establishes that the shliach has to testify b'fanei nechtam means that the shliach has to testify on the ksiva lishma, which is doraisa according to Rabbi Meir, but even on the chasima lishma, which is only d'Rabbanan. Ve'ha Omar of Nachman, he says, is this possible? Omer Hoya Rabbi Meir, afilu mitzo bi ashpa, if Ruvain finds a get in the rubbish pail, it was not written lishma, but it happens to have his name on it and his wife's name. And here we start Daf Daled. V'chasamo u'nesanola. There were no edim signed on this get that he found in the rubbish, but the Baal, whose name happens to be in this get, by sheer coincidence, appoints 2 witnesses to sign the get. And then the Baal, gave the get to his wife. And Rav Nachman says that according to Rabbi Meir, kosher, the get, it fulfills all the requirements of Rabbi Meir, because even if the ksiva of the get was not lishma, but the chasima was lishma, like in the case we found the get in the rubbish, in which case the get was certainly not written for this Baal and for this Isha, but nevertheless, once there was a chasima lishma, then the get is kosher. And that is the shita of Rabbi Meir according to Rav Nachman. So that means that Rabbi Nachman is telling us that according to Rav Meir, everything inheres in the chasima, and there's no requirement of ksiva lishma. Otherwise, how could Rabbi Nachman tell us that if the Baal adds 2 witnesses to sign lishma on the get that he found in the rubbish, he can give that get to his wife? Where was the ksiva lishma? So once again, we're stuck because the Mishnah says that the shliach has to testify b'fanai nechtav, meaning that I saw the writing of the get and it was written lishma. According to Rabbi Nachman's interpretation of Rabbi Meir, there is no requirement of ksiva lishma. The Chitema, now the Gemara makes another valiant effort to try to attribute our Mishnah of B'fanei Nechtam to Rabbi Meir. Anon midaraisa komas nisan la. In other words, Rav Nachman, in explaining Rabbi Meir that you could be machshir a get that was found in the rubbish, that's only according to the Ikar Din Torah, which means that the Torah does not require a ksiva lishma. And Rabbi Meir does admit that on a D'Rabbanan level, we require that the get be written lishma. So although Rabbi Meir, according to the interpretation of Rabbi Nachman, is focused on the Doraisa halacha, but our Mishnah is based on the D'Rabbanan requirement, which means that Rabbi Meir confesses that on a D'Rabbanan level, the get has to be written lishma, and therefore the Mishnah could be attributed to Rabbi Meir. The shliach has to say b'fanei nechtav in addition to b'fanei nechtam, and the reason for that is because the Rabbanan required a ksiva lishma, and the Gemara rejects this outright. Ihachi, if that's the case, Rabbi Nachman shouldn't have said just Omer Hoy Rabbi Meir afilu mitzal ba'ashpa behichtim vechasmo b'nasalok kasher. How could he let those words out of his mouth? They're so misleading. The impression you get from Rabbi Nachman is that Rabbi Meir said that even if he finds a get in the ashpa, the get is kosher as long as it was a chasima lishma. And now you're telling me that B'Rabbanan and Rabbi Meir requires a ksiva lishma, and therefore the get that he found in the ashpa is possible? How could Rabbi Nachman not make that absolutely crystal clear? Rabbi Nachman should have qualified him. He should have said, Omer Hay Rabbi Meir, Dvar Torah mi boile. Quote, Dvar Torah. He should have added those 2 words, Dvar Torah. He should have pointed out that Rabbi Meir could qualify a get that he found in the rubbish without a ksiva lishma on a doraisa level. Add the words Dvar Torah. And by that, we would understand, by implication, that midrabanan, the get is not kosher. But Rav Nachman said it without qualifying it. He was saying that according to Rabbi Meir, the get is kosher, both midoraisa and midrabanan. And that's very misleading. And therefore, we really believe that according to Rabbi Meir, there's no, in the light of Rav Nachman's interpretation of Rabbi Meir, there's no requirement, even midrabanan, of a ksiva lishma. So how could Rabbi Meir be the author of a Mishnah that requires b'fanei nechtav? Eloli olam, let's go back to our original suggestion that our Mishnah should be attributed to Rabbi Elazar. And the shliach has to testify not only on the chasima, but also on the ksiva. Now, the Gemara already proved earlier that according to Rabbi Elazar, you only need ksiva lishma. You don't need chasima lishma. So why would the shliach, according to our Mishnah, be required to testify on the chasima lishma? And the Gemara says the following: V'chilo boy Rabbi Elazar chasima. When Rabbi Elazar forgoes, or let's say waives the requirement of signing of Adam signing on a get in order to make the get lishma, that's heicha deleka Adam klal. So this is called she'eno mino machriv lo. What do I mean? That if there were no Eidei Chasim on the get, so the sheet of Rabbi Elazar is the get is kosher because the ksiva was lishma, and there were Eidei Masira who witnessed the giving of the get. And that's fine and dandy because there are no Eidim written on the get. However, we have a concept called mezuyaf mitocho. What does that mean? Before I called it machriv, it means that if there are Eidim signed on the get, which again, Rabbi Elazar would not require that Eidim signed on the get, but once there are Eidim signed on the get, then Hechdik Eidim by Rabbi Elazar requires that the Chasim have to be lishma. So again, in a very paradoxical way, a get that has no signatures at all, according to Rabbi Elazar, is superior to a get that has signatures. Why? Because if there were no signatures, then all we need is b'fanei nechtav. We only need testimony on the ksiva lishma, and that's all we need, plus the Eidei Masira, and we have a good package deal here. But if the get has two Eidim signed on it, then we have to clarify beyond the shadow of a doubt that this chasima was a valid chasima lishma. The Rabbi Abba Moder Rabbi Elazar b'mezuyaf mitocho shu pasul. And mezuyaf mitocho means that if we look at the get and there's a psul inside the get, and basically the word get here in this context means a shtar, a document, has to be valid and legally binding from that which is within the shtar. So let's say, for example, what would Rabbi Elazar say about a get that has Eidim signed on it, and one of the Eidim is a Karov, or he's a Apostle? The get would be Apostle, even though you didn't need any Eidim signed on the get. But once you have Eidim, those Eidim could ruin and disqualify the get. How? Because, let's say they were Krovim, they were Psulim, or they signed Shalol Lishma. So therefore, we can interpret our Mishnah in the light of Rabbi Elazar. We're talking about a get that came in Medina Siyam, and there were two Eidim signed on the get. According to Rabbi Elazar, there didn't have to be. But once there are two Eidim signed on the get, we must require the Shliach to declare b'fanei nechtam namely that the chsimos were lishma, so that the get is not mezuyif mitocho. And now we have a shita of Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi has a third shita in Tanoim, and Rav Ashi wants to interpret our Mishnah in light of that third shita, which is the Tana Rabbi Yehuda. And Rabbi Yehuda's shita is codified in a Mishnah later on Daf Chaf Aleph Amid Beis. Now, I should point out one thing. It's a little bit late, but anyway, let's make sure it's on record here. Our whole sugya today is predicated on Rabbah. And Rabbah is of the opinion that the reason why our Mishnah requires B'fanei Nechtam in the case of a get coming from Medina Sayyam in the hands of a shliach is because of Ein B'kiyin Lishma. Because there was a significant amount of ignorance regarding Lishma. Rabbi Yehudi, the Snan, we have a Mishnah. We had quoted this Mishnah earlier about a ksivas get b'yodim mechuber lekarka, and the Tanakam of that Mishnah holds that even if a get was written on a stump of a tree that is connected to the ground, once it's signed, let me start backwards. Once we cut it off and then sign the tree, it's kosher, even though at the time of the writing of the get, it was mechuber lekarka, which means it's possible. But the Tanakama holds everything depends upon the chasima. Rabbi Yehuda posel, I should take sivasa v'chasimasa b'tolish. Rabbi Yehuda is going to require that not only the chasima be signed after the get was cut off the ground and detached, but even the ksiva has to be betolush. And we see now that Rabbi Yehuda accepts the chumrah of both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Elazar. He requires both the ksiva to be proper, meaning lishma, and the chasima to be lishma. Hence, we understand very well why the Mishnah, this is Rabbi Ashi's logic, requires that the shliach declare b'fanei nechtav u'b'fanei nechtam. We need both in order to establish the shema and the kashrus of the get, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara is so impressed by the logic of Rav Ashi. You know, we wasted so much time here looking for the authorship of our Mishnah. Meikara my time alo mukminin lo Rabbi Yehuda. Why did our Gemara hesitate? Why was the Gemara inhibited when Rabbi Yehuda says explicitly, I need both ksiva and chasima lishma? That would be the simplest answer to explain our Mishnah. Why try to interpret our Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir, according to Rabbi Elazar? And the Gemara answers that we're not really excited about attributing our Mishnah to Rabbi Yehuda. We'd rather prefer, even if it's a little bit dachuk, and it's a bit of a push, to interpret the Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir or according to Rabbi Elazar. Ma'adrinan Adari Meir, we will prefer interpreting our Mishnah in the light of Rabbi Meir. Why? Because we have a rule in explaining a Mishnah, the Stamas Nisa Rabbi Meir. And therefore, we would prefer, if possible, to interpret the Mishnah according to Rabbi Meir. So even though Rabbi Yehuda says explicitly we need both ksiva and chasima lishma, but you know what? Let's prefer to advocate our Mishnah and attribute it to Rabbi Meir. Now, similar. Madrinan a Rabbi Elazar, we also have a preference to interpret the Mishnah in the light of Rabbi Lazar because of a different rule, the Kaivalon Hilchasa Kavase Begittin. There's a principle which we've never seen before, but the Gemara is establishing right here in front of our eyes, that in any issue, we always tip the scale in Gittin in favor of Rabbi Lazar. He was like the final word in Gittin. And it was Rabbi Lazar who said that a get is kosher with ksiva, even without Aiden. So what are we going to say about our Mishnah that requires chasima, that the shliach testify that the signing of the get was lishma? That's going to be a case where there were Adim signed on the get, and we want to avoid the possibility of mizuyah bitocho because einam b'kiyam b'lishma, maybe the chasima was shalol lishma. Now, all this is based on Rabbah. Rabbah is of the opinion that the requirement of b'fanei nechtam in the Mishnah at the beginning of Gittin is based on lo hayu b'kiyam b'lishma. But the dissenting view against Rabbah is that of Rava. And Rava says that ein edim mitzuyim l'kaima, which means ein shayaros mitzuyos, which means that she would have to be mekayim the get, and she needs witnesses to guarantee that there's no counterfeit here, to authenticate the signatures on the get, and maybe it's coming from Medina Sayyam, who's going to be able to authenticate the signatures. And therefore, in order to make sure that this get is protected and valid, we're going to require that the shliach testify as a substitute kiyum. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah regarding the Tanakama that requires that the get in the hands of the shliach from Medina Sayyam will require b'fanei nechtam Ram Gamliel Omer. Af hamevi min harekem umin hacheger. Even if he brings the get, the shliach brings the get from cities that are on the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Eliezer, Omer afilu mikfar ludin lilod. Even if he brings the get from Kfar Ludin to Lod. So let's go back to our Mishnah for a minute. On the second line of the Mishnah on Daf Beis, Rav Gamliel Omer Af Hamevi Min Harekem Umin Hacheger. Okay, now the biblical names for these two cities, which are on the border of Eretz Yisrael on the southeastern side, are Kadesh and Bered. And the shliach, according to Rabbi Gamliel, coming from those cities, would require that he testify funny after funny. Rabbi Lazar says afilu mikfar ludin. Okay, that's a city in Chutz La'aretz that's swallowed up in the borders of Eretz Yisrael, meaning the borders of Eretz Yisrael go like this, they indent and go around and up. And in that indent, that little island, there's Kfar Ludin. So it's really swallowed up inside the area of Eretz Yisrael, and he brings it from there to Lud. Lud is right next door, but that's within the bounds of Eretz Yisrael. And in such a case, we're not going to make distinctions and say, well, this place is within the swallowed area. We're going to just make an absolute rule that if the get is coming from Chutz La'aretz, the shliach must recite the magic words b'fanei nechta, b'fanei nechta. The Amar Abaye, Ba'yoros hasmuchos l'Eretz Yisrael, umuvlos b'tchum Eretz Yisrael askinon. Now, it seems that Abaye is going back to Rav Gamliel, and he's claiming that even Rekem and Cheger are actually cities that are surrounded by the bounds of Eretz Yisrael. So they are very close to Eretz Yisrael. And nevertheless, Rav Gamliel requires that the Shliach testify b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. Rabbi Eliezer, again, in the case of Kfar Ludin Lulud, once again, he requires b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam, even though Kfar Ludin is muvla inside the Tchumei Eretz Yisrael. The Omar Rabbah, Barav Huna, Barav Chana, Lididi, Chazi Liahu Asr. I actually myself saw this place, the Havi, and the distance between Kfar Ludin and Lud, about which Rabbi Eliezer spoke, was Kimi Bei Kubi Lepumpadisa. It was like next door. And these are two areas in Bavel that are close to each other. He says here in the footnote that the merchak, the distance between Beit Kuvi and Pumbedisa, was Shisha Parsos. And how much is a parsa? A parsa, I believe, is 2,000 amma, if I remember correctly. So 6 times 2 is 8,000 amma. That means Mamish next door. It's like going up Bathurst Street, you know, or halfway up Bathurst.
Okay.
From where's that mall that I used to like on the what's it called, the Lawrence Mall? I forgot. Anyway,
yeah, Lawrence and Bathurst.
Lawrence and Bathurst, going all the way up till till you make that, the left turn, getting you to Rabbi Weber's shul. What was that left turn? I forgot what was it called.
York Downs.
Yeah, you had to go to York Downs. Yeah. Anyway, it's a very close area. And nevertheless, according to Rabbi Eliezer requires B'fanei Nechtam in Kfar Ludin Lulud, even though they're next door to each other. So Michlal, if that's the Chiddush here of Rabbi Eliezer of Kfar Ludin Lulud, or for that matter, Rabbi Gamliel, maybe Rekem and Cheger, is Michlal the Tanakama Savar Hanilot Tzara. The Tanakama, who didn't add this extra Chiddush, held that if you bring a get from an area in Chutzotz that's Samuch or Bolua in the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, you don't need B'fanei Nechtam. So what's this argument all about? So if not for the Gemara, I would have said that the Machlokas is about low plug kind of thing. Should we make it a definite, absolute rule? If you're in Chutz La'aretz, you require the Shliach say B'fanei Nechtam. But the Gemara says, my laba hakam ifli. The Mar Savar, according to Tanakama, he's going to hold like Rabbah, that Lefisha ein Bekiyin L'shma, Vahani K'miri. But in the cases of very close cities that are right on the border of Eretz Yisrael, they were Bekiyim, they were experts, meaning they knew the law that a get Isha has to be written Lishma. So therefore they weren't included in the Takana and the requirement of B'fanei Nechtam. Marsav or Gamliel disagrees with the Tanakama, and he accepts the understanding of Rava that we're worried about Kiyum haget. Lefisha eina edim etsuyim lekaima. Who's going to recognize these two signatures? Vahani nami lo shlichi. And even if they're next door cities, but nevertheless, it's very hard to find people here who could be Makayim the get. You have to go with a passport, let's say. And then even after you arrive with your passport, you have to get through immigration. And I've been there and I've done that in Toronto. And it's not so easy. They give you a whole hassle. If you don't have the right documents, they'll send you back flying. I remember one time I forgot my documents. Whoa, big hassle. Anyway, so this is called Nami Lo Shlichi. Nami Lo Shlichi means that it's going to be very difficult in Eretz Yisrael to find someone to be Mekayim the Chasimus on the get, because it's so difficult to cross the borders. And therefore we require of the Shliach to recite B'fanei Nechtam, B'fanei Nechtam. So in effect, the machlokas between Rav Gamliel and the Tanna Kamma Mishnah is identical with the machlokas between Rabbah and Rava. Lo, says the Gemara, no. Rabbah mitaritz l'taimo, v'Rava mitaritz l'taimo. Each one is going to square all the shittas of the Tanoim with their particular view. Rabbah mitaritz l'taimo, the Kuli Alma, everybody agrees that the reason why the Chachamim made this takana that required a shliach to recite b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam is l'fisha ein b'kiyum l'shma, because we're not certain that the get was written l'shma. So what is the machlokes? Tanna Kamma savar hani keva desmuchos migmar gemiri. It's somehow the scholarship of Eretz Yisrael, meaning that very great bekiyas and knowledge that you need lishma, was taught and transmitted to those cities like Rekem and Cheger that were on the border of Eretz Yisrael. And those who lived in Rekem and Cheger were bekiyim in the law and the requirement of get lishma. They didn't have, therefore, those places a status of chutz la'aretz. That was before Rav Gamliel. That's the Tanna Kamma. The Asa Rav Gamliel Lememar. Now Rav Gamliel comes and he says the following. You know what? Muvlos Gemiri. I can agree with you that those cities that were swallowed up and encircled by the extended landmass of Eretz Yisrael, they knew about Lishma. But Smuchos lo Gemiri. But cities that are on the border but outside of Eretz Yisrael, then apikiyim b'lishma. They require b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. V'asar Rabbi Eliezer l'meimu v'los nami lo. And Rabbi Eliezer went a step further, and he said that even muvlos require b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. They don't have that b'kiyah. So there are three shitas here. One shita is that any area, any city that's near Eretz Yisrael, they're b'kiyim, they don't have to. And then we have Rav Gamliel who says no. As long as it's near Eretz Yisrael, that's not enough. They don't know about Lishma. Only if it's muvlos. And then Rabbi Eliezer adds that even if it's muvlos, they don't know about Lishma. And here's where the Gemara makes a little bit of a move in my direction, so to speak, about lo plu. And the Gemara adds the following four words in explaining Rabbi Eliezer. Shelo tachlok b'medinas hayam. We're not going to make distinctions with regard to Medinas Hayam between one place and the other. Rabbana made a takana, flat, absolute, no exceptions to the rule. Any shliach that brings a get from Chutz La'aretz, from Medinas Hayam, I don't care how close it is, I don't care if it's samuch, if it's muvla, we require b'fanei nechtam, b'fanei nechtam. That's all according to Rabbah. V'Rava mitaritz l'taimei, the Kuli Alma, all of the Tanoim in our Mishnah agree that the requirement of b'fanei nechtam is l'fisha ein edem mitzuyim l'kaimo. The Tanna Kamma savar hani, in these cases of Rekem v'Cheger, kevon de smuchos, since they're close to Eretz Yisrael, mishkach shliche. it's very common and it's very simple to find witnesses from those places, and they could be located in Eretz Yisrael. They travel back and forth on a regular basis, and they'll be able to be Mekayim the get. They'll recognize and authenticate the two signatures in the get. So I agree with you. In the case of Muvlos, they have, rafters going back and forth. So there's always going to be people to be Mekayim the get. Shriche. However, Smuchos, even cities that are close to the border of Eretz Yisrael, nevertheless, lo shchichi, they don't come into Eretz Yisrael. Like we said before, they can't get through immigration. Also, Rabbi Lezer lemeimar hamuvlos nami lo. Even muvlos, despite the fact that they are legally chutz la'aretz, as far as the takana b'fani nechtam, we're going to say that even though what? Well, let me go over it one more time. Just 1 second, make sure I got the mathematics. Okay. Tanakama says that smuchos mishkach shchicha. You don't need befeil. Rabbi Gamliel says no. Only muvlos do not require. And now, Aser Rabbi Eliezer says even muvlos require b'fanei nechtam. Shlo tachlok b'medina sayim. Tonight we learned in the Mishnah. Chachamim omreinu tzarich sheyom b'fanei nechtam ela mevi medina sayim. Ve'amolech. What's a molech? If a shliach brings a get from Eretz Yisrael to Medina Sayah, so she's outside the boundaries. And that was the addition of the Chachamim. It did not appear in the words of the Tanakama. So if we go back to the Mishnah again, and we read the Tanakama says, "Hamevi get me Medina Sayah." He doesn't say a word about molech. Michlal, we should therefore derive from the Tanakama, Savar molech lo tsaret, that a molech does not require b'fanei nechtam, only a mevi. So if we're bringing a get from Eretz Yisrael, then the assumption is the get was written l'shma. And the Gemara, once again, is going to make an attempt at interpreting the Machlokes Tanoim as dependent upon the Machlokes Abaye and Rava. Excuse me, not Abaye, I meant Rava and Rava. The Marsav, my Labarkamithli Marsav, the Tanakama holds that the reason for the takana of requiring the Fari Nechta, like Rabbah, is Lefisha Ein Bekiyin Lishma. We're afraid that they don't know about Lishma. But Vahani, the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, Gemir, they know about Lishma. Umar, some of the Chacham say, Lefisha Ein Eidim Mitzuyim L'Kaima. And we're worried about the fact that there are not enough Eidim who recognize the signatures of these two Eidim.
Why would they not know about Lishma?
In Chutz La'aretz, there was a lot of ignorance, and all shtaros are kosher without Lishma. The only exception in the whole galaxy of shtaros is only a get.
All right.
And in Chutz La'aretz, they were far from the centers of Torah learning, and there was a lot of ignorance. They didn't know about the requirement of Lishma. But in Eretz Yisrael, they knew about Lishma.
Okay.
And therefore, we understand very well why the Tanakama holds that in the case of Molech, where the Shliach starts, he originates in Eretz Yisrael, the get that he's holding was certainly written Lishma.
Right.
But then the Chachamim say that even in the case of Molech, you require B'fanei Nechtam. And the question is why? So that's what we're going to study in Mitzvah Hashem here immediately.